Boston Bambino, a Marvel fanfiction written on AO3 by Wayward Keener. The link for this fanfiction will be in the description box below, so I encourage you all to go check it out. Peter had to actually be an intern this weekend. He got to follow Tony around on a business meeting in Boston that Tony had. Pepper had suggested that as their excuse as to why the two were actually in Boston. Part of the reason was a meeting with Rhodey for some additional Avengers training. There was the other conference in Boston that Tony had to speak at. Peter followed him around like an adorable little intern. Some people had even dared to ask if Peter was Tony's son. Peter turned down the claim by letting them know he was just an intern. Tony had overheard, but didn't say anything about the situation. Happy just laughed when Peter told him in the car. Peter was not upset about it, he was just a little bit annoyed. "If you want to sleep, take a nap now. It's going to be a long car ride," Happy said, knowing Peter had a habit of sleeping in cars. He always slept in cars, and the ride normally drifted him to sleep as a kid. Now he was a teenager, he still had the habit of falling asleep, something that Happy found out the few times he had to drive Peter somewhere. Peter thanked him as Tony looked up from his phone, only to watch Peter getting comfortable and closing his eyes. "I'm shocked he can sleep with your driving," Tony said. "That would be your driving he'd probably stay awake for." Happy teased right back at his boss. Tony scoffed, but didn't argue with Happy on the point. "What did you say when they asked about Peter being your son?" Happy asked him after a bit. Tony froze and looked at the kid. His kid. May had said Tony was acting like a dad. He guessed in the last few months he'd started to, in his own way, to see Peter as his kid. He hadn't had a kid impact his life the way Peter had. Not in a long time, and he rarely saw that kid, only on birthdays and the occasional school event that he could make. He'd never wanted kids, not until he got involved in the lives of two kids. So yes, he did see Peter as a son, but Happy didn't need to know that. No one but Tony needed to know that. "It's not hard to believe I have a kid around that age," Tony told him. "You're just avoiding the question," Happy responded. He knew he wasn't going to answer the question. Peter muttered some formula in his sleep and Tony smiled. The kid needs sleep anyway. So he went back to focusing on his phone as he ignored Happy's questions. Happy had seen the smile from his boss, so his question might have been avoided, but he got his answer at that point. Tony tried waking Peter up, but the boy was fast asleep. Tony got out and went to Peter's side. Happy watched as Tony unbuckled Peter's seatbelt. Once the belt was out of the way, Tony picked up Peter and hoisted him up close to him. He didn't expect the boy to be so light, but he was. Peter seemed to notice the change, but it didn't wake him up. He just seemed to be more comfortable with Tony holding him. Tony smiled as he carried Peter towards the elevator. Happy hit the up button and watched the duo. Tony seemed to be looking at the boy as if the boy were his son. Once on his floor, Tony took Peter to one of the guest rooms that had become Peter's room when he stayed the night at the tower. Peter stayed asleep as Tony laid him down on the bed before he tucked in the kid. He was almost out when Peter finally said something. "Thanks, Dad," Peter said, still asleep. Tony smiled at the kid. He didn't know if Peter was dreaming or what, but he certainly wasn't going to wake the kid and find out. "Night, Bambino," Tony told him. Peter was safe and asleep. He wouldn't be awake for a while now, and Tony had to sleep himself. Peter woke up the next morning, got up and found out that Tony was cooking breakfast for the both of them. It was a nice surprise, especially since Tony rarely cooked, and according to Pepper, shouldn't have even been allowed in a kitchen. But there he was. The pancakes were already done, and he was working on some eggs and bacon. "You made breakfast?" Peter asked. "Figured the spider kid must be hungry," Tony told him. Thanks for making breakfast then," Peter said, as he got his plate made. "No problem, Bambino," Tony told him. Peter turned to look at him, confused, but didn't say anything about the nickname. He heard it last night, as, well, he accidentally called Tony Dad, which he would chalk out to his sleep-deprived mind, anyone asked. If it wasn't for May, Peter wouldn't have known what Tony was saying, but luckily it was a nickname he used to have from his childhood, something May called him when he was really little. He learned the meaning quickly, and knew it was a term of endearment for a child from a relative. "Did you carry me up last night?" Peter asked. "You are pretty light for some of your age," Tony said. "Are you eating right?" "More than a normal teenager to account for my metabolism," Peter said. Tony still seemed concerned, but didn't say anything, as he set the plate of bacon and eggs down in front of Peter. Peter thanked him as he enjoyed the breakfast. It was a quiet morning, but a nice morning after a long weekend. Peter should accidentally call Tony Dad more often, if this was the treatment he was going to get. "You know, we could probably work on the sleep before you go home," Tony told him. Peter stopped and smiled. Yep, he could get used to being seen as Tony's kid from the man himself. It sounds great, Dad.